Okay, so this is a really important video that I want to make today, and it's so important because there's so many things happening. Everything is moving very quickly in terms of information, in terms of how quickly things are becoming more controlled and regulated in a world that's in lockdown. And it's really interesting because I'm hearing everyone else's stories about how things are going around the world makes me very grateful to be living in America. Because, yeah, we have a lot of things in America that are not right. And, we have a tendency towards doing things in this world that are not effective, and we are based on an economic system that is at the moment crumbling, and there's lots of things that are messed up in our country, but we have a level of this integrated point of the fact that we should have freedom, and that is keeping our government from just immediately coming in and taking total and complete control over our lives, which is what you'll see in other countries around the world, where the governments can just go in and immediately stop people from leaving their homes, like arresting people, beating people in the street, like forcing people to stay in their homes, which that just doesn't work very well in America. And there could be lots of reasons for that. It could be the average IQ of our population. It could be the fact that we still have guns in our country. It could be the fact that we're not socialist. Like there's lots of reasons for that. But what I see is this underlying point, the real point of value there is that in America, we still see a lot of value in the individual. And the ideal is that the individual adds value back to the group, which is something that, it's not coordinated here effectively, but that value system is still integrated into the average American, which is why I think a lot of people voted for Trump. Like there's all these points, whether you agree with that or not, it doesn't really matter. But I'm sure every American can agree that there's this fundamental point of freedom and individuality, and the importance of the individual being able to make decisions for themselves as a value system, whether we have it totally effectively integrated into our system or not. That's still there, which makes it very difficult to just come in and control the population without having a revolt. So why is that important? Because what I've seen in America is that what has to be done then, because you can't come in and just forcibly control the whole population as quickly as you can in other countries. What has to be done here is a very slow use of propaganda and brainwashing to get the American people to accept control. So I want to share my perspective on how the homeschooling and unschooling movements are very slowly going to be squashed in America. And that's what's currently in place. That's what's currently the path that we're going on, and how we, as the American people, can recognize this, not go into fear about it, but start preparing ourselves now to stop that from happening. Why is it so important? Because the ability of, firstly, you can see the failure of our school systems. Like, it's very, very clear. It's very obvious here in America. In other countries, like, for example, I want to talk a little bit about Sweden. in this video because this exact same thing of what we're seeing happen in America happened in Sweden. But let me give a little context first, because I didn't mention this yet. So unless you may be unaware of this, but there is a homeschool summit happening at Harvard University, at the Law University, this summer. And there are a bunch of people coming to the summit and leading the summit, being the speakers of the summit, who are all advocates of the fact that homeschooling is a platform for child abuse. It's a platform for religious zealots. It's a platform for racism and sexism and all the other isms that we've defined are not supportive in our culture, especially in the progressive idea of the failings of our culture. And so that is happening this summer with the intention of figuring out how we can regulate homeschooling parents, or how they can regulate homeschooling parents. So coming up with ideas to push forward in our government to regulate homeschool, to make it so that, for example, parents need to have teaching degrees, or they need to have some kind of certification to be able to teach their kids. They need to have, documented proof of the fact that they've taught all of the same subjects to their children that they would be learning had they gone to school, and also just kind of looking at potentially having a preemptive ban on homeschooling. Okay, and you might think, okay, well, in America that would never happen. It's really cool to go and look at what happened in Sweden in the early, in the late, from 2009, 2010, 2011, to watch the progression of what happened, how they completely and totally banned homeschool in Sweden, and how quickly it occurred, and how many of the people were just totally shocked. This information is really difficult to find. I had to go back on internet archives to find people, real people, not just propaganda material and brainwashing articles from media that was clearly pro-government in Sweden, but actually just hearing from the people and seeing, how shocked they were, how a lot of the homeschool parents were just shocked at the fact that, Sweden just decided to totally ban everything. And again, the Swedish government, the whole starting point, if you go back and look at 2009, and it may have been earlier, there might be people who know more about this than I do, or who are actually from Sweden that can give more context, but it started with the concept of the fact that we have to be able to stop religious programming of children in the home, and that was the big push behind why they should just ban homeschooling altogether. And that's easier to do in a socialist society, just because, again, the society is less programmed with that ideal that I was talking about, or the value, the principle of the rights of the individual as strongly as it is in America. So if you're not from America, you may not fully grasp that concept, but the fact that you live in or if you're from a socialist country and you're watching this, the fact that you all don't have guns anymore in your country is just an example of that. Okay, whatever your perspective is on whether the population should have guns or not, that part doesn't really matter. The fact that that in America we still have guns, and that the individual has the right to do that, and that's a big example of the holding on to the rights of the individual. So I'm not here to talk about guns and that perspective of things. I'm just trying to demonstrate the values that Americans hold on to, that is actually a really cool value that everyone globally should have, not regarding guns necessarily, but it's that right of the individual to make decisions about their own lives, which if we're looking towards what we want to create in this world, if we want to create a world that, and I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but like if we want to create a world where everyone has equal rights and everyone has the ability to have a vote for what they want to see in this world, having that value system of the importance of the individual and the importance of the group as well, and the giving of how the individual provides value to the group, is an important value system that the rest of the world can look to America for. Regardless, I mean, you kind of have to look around the corruption of it, but the reality is that value is here. Just checking my daughter, she's sleeping. But so it's cool to go and look at Sweden. Look how quickly everything happened, and how now in Sweden they face, you can't homeschool there unless you want to pay a $15,000 fine per child per year, which some Americans would scoff at that, because I mean, I know people who pay $18,000 a year for private school, so they would just pay that, and homeschool their kid, per kid per year here in America. So, but effectively it's created it so that in countries like Sweden, and I know Germany is also one that has completely banned homeschooling, you effectively cannot homeschool your children at all. And so go and investigate the time, if you're interested in these things, or if you're a homeschooler, and you're kind of having that concept of like, oh, it could never happen here. Go and investigate how it happened there. Listen to the people, listen to what they're saying, listen to their perspectives. I actually had one that I was going to read. And I closed that page, but I had some, but anyways, you can go find it for yourself. But the reason I'm bringing up Sweden is because when I was a kid, Sweden was seen as like the social utopia of our world. Like I always heard about how the American school system needed to be more like the Swedish school system. And how if we could only be like them, we would know so much more. Like the kids learn so many languages there. They're just, more socially responsible, all of these things. But then when you actually hear from parents, in Sweden, whose kids are going to school, who are starting to kind of open their eyes and see the reality of what's going on in the school system there, and how the kids are just being brainwashed, and they kind of have that mindset of, oh man, I read something really cool. Here's a quote that I found from this Swedish parent, saying, "Our main worry is that the no one should aspire to be better mentality that pervades here in schools, and the bullying which is increasingly dramatic." I think that's so fascinating, because it's the no one should aspire to be better concept that pervades Swedish schools. And again, that is so fascinating, because that's such an easy way to control the average person, is that you shouldn't aspire to be better. Now that's coming from a mother in Sweden. So it's really, really fascinating. But why I'm saying that could happen here in America is because Americans, we have that value system that I've been talking about, which of the importance of the individual, but we can still be brainwashed. We can still, especially because we have such a poor education here in America. You can see that with everything that's going on right now with all the coronavirus stuff, whatever side you're on. Like, you can see the ease at which we get sucked into fear, the ease at which we can easily just be told something and we just accept that it's true, and then we find out a week later it's not true. So it's not like we in America are immune to what happened in Sweden with them banning homeschooling. It could very easily happen here, and this is how it begins. We have people in academia who go and make decisions and look and say and argue that the homeschooling environment is what creates a lot of the religious zealots. And that's, if you go and read the information from the the people who are leading this Harvard summit in June, I think it's in June, the books that they've written and the articles that they've written, the papers that they've written are all directing in this direction. They're all going towards this direction of religious zealots, racism, sexism, all of these things are festering in the homeschooling environment. Like the white supremacists, the ideas behind white supremacy are all festering here. And this is where it starts. This is where it starts. And then you go and you read other articles, and I've spent years investigating all of this, and it's just coming to fruition. It's coming to serve its purpose now that we're all in lockdown and so many parents are homeschooling, and maybe even a lot of them are looking at and considering, now that they have their kids at home and they've been home long enough for you to kind of get into a flow where you can see, okay, maybe potentially I could do homeschooling. This is the perfect time for all of this, this whole movement of advocating against homeschooling and specifically advocating against unschooling. Why do I say that? Unschooling will end with this regulation. They might still allow homeschooling, but they will end unschooling. If you don't know what unschooling is, it's basically the concept of, you don't necessarily have there's a big concept behind it, but the value that I see within it is that you don't necessarily have a set curriculum that you're teaching your kid. You're not schooling them, because a lot of homeschooling programs you're following a set of curriculum, and there's a ton of them out there. But you choose a curriculum, you stick to it, you have your schedule for the day or at least for the week, and you're sticking to that. And you could potentially provide reports to the government if you needed to at the end of the year of what your child's done and all that kind of stuff. Whereas unschooling is more from the perspective of you're going based on what your child's interests are. You're going in the direction of where your child wants to go. So you don't have necessarily a set, like line by line set of things that your child's going to be learning or activities that they're going to be doing that day. You don't have their entire day mapped out necessarily. It's more freely going where your child wants to go. They can read the books that they want to read. They can do the things that they'd like to do during the day. So there's that side of things. Now, if you consider this, because we will see homeschooling regulation, we will see this. Like, there's a reason why it's coming. It's in the public eye right now, why it's coming from Harvard specifically, which is seen as an academic authority. So the average person who doesn't understand this stuff and may not even, maybe they stuck their kids in public school, or they have their kids in private school, they may not even see the value of homeschooling. They're going to easily accept that this should be, of course, regulate the homeschoolers. They should have to do what my kid is doing in school. And that makes sense because I've got my kid in school, so obviously I see the value of school. Just speaking hypothetically, my kids are not in school. But I've got my kid in school, so your kid should have to be regular. I don't see any issue with that. They won't see any problem with it. But somebody who is unschooling their kid, or who is going by a more relaxed approach to education, will see a problem with this, because you can't necessarily use the same units of measure to see whether your child is progressing in the same way that they would in school. And that's exactly why you're keeping them home and you're unschooling them, is because you don't want to use the same units of measure and the same grading rubrics and those kinds of things to make sure that your child is educated. There's a reason why you're keeping your kids at home, and there's a reason why you might decide, for example, to unschool. So both of these situations, the homeschoolers and the unschoolers, are going to face regulation if we allow things to continue the way that they're going right now. If we allow ourselves to accept the authority of, for example, Harvard Law School to make the decision as to whether, what's really going on in our families and in our homes, and what our real purpose is. Again, because according to these directors of this homeschool summit, if you go and read their books and go and read their articles and actually open your eyes to what's going on here, they are actually saying that most of the people who make the decision to homeschool, which is this is the statement I always heard when I was a kid, when I didn't even know any homeschoolers when I was a kid, but this was always the thing that was said about homeschoolers, was their parents were essentially crazy religious people. And so that's the mindset that these people are coming from, and that's the mindset that they will use to convince the average American person who keeps their kids in school, because only about 2 million kids in the United States, I'm pretty sure that's the number current, but only about 2 million kids in the United States are homeschooled at the moment. So the larger of the population of parents are putting their kids in school. So all that the government has to do is to get the average person to generally accept this point. Because just like what happened in Sweden, if you go and investigate, that whole movement of the homeschoolers who were advocating against having the homeschooling banned were squashed. Like, they're just gone. There's like, if you go, there's all these articles about the last homeschooling family in Sweden. And all these cases of where kids were taken from their parents, or the family would make a plea to the government to be able to homeschool their kids and come up with a plan to do so, and then it was just squashed. So, and again, there might be movements, there might be ways around that law, which I'm not aware of, but if you know about them, make me aware of them. But regardless, the percentage of the population that's homeschooling in Sweden is very small. And it's much smaller than it was before, whenever this law went into place. I think it was like 2011 that completely, totally banned homeschooling and put all these fines in place, and where the government actually started going in and actually pursuing fines on the homeschooling families that they became more and more aware of. So this is the path that's currently happening in the US. There's all these academics who, you think they're not connected to the people in government if they're going to Harvard Law School. You don't think they have the ear of the people in government, more so than homeschooling parents. Again, you can see what's happening now in our society right now. Even in America, where, for example, in my city, they just passed or they just made it a law where in public you have to wear a mask for the next, at least, I think they're saying 30 days. But and then our police chief, the director of our police here in Houston, basically said, "Oh, I'm not gonna stand for that. We're not gonna charge people for a fine for. We're not gonna go around and charge every person we see a fine for putting a mask on in public," which is pretty cool. But anyways, it's still happening here in the United States, where even we as a population we're just very slowly and quietly accepting things that we're being told, and we'll do the same with this. So even as large as our homeschooling movement is, it could very easily be squashed by this slow rise, and it's happening much more quickly. It's been rising for many years, many years, but this is kind of the final push. And you have to go read. If you're unschooling, you need to listen to what I'm saying, okay? Because you should go read the articles about how terrible unschooling is, and how all these schools, like even the democratic schools and things like that, are coming out saying, "We're not unschooling. Don't think we're unschooling. Like, we're not. We promise." So unschooling has become a dirty word now, where it's like, oh, you wanna educate your kid in a way that's not like at all like the school. Like, you want to take a totally different approach. Oh, no. You're that's a terrible decision. You're making your kid stupid. Which, let me get into that. Okay, I'll get into the whole point here. Because really we need a lot of common sense. We need more common sense within this point, which is, our public schools and our private schools even are not meeting the needs of our individual students. So we're not even living up to the actual value systems that we have here in America of the rights of the individual and the ability of the individual to really rise in our lives. We're not really giving that to kids. You can't do it. You can't really do it effectively. And I've worked alongside teachers for a very, very long time. I couldn't work in the school system. I couldn't do it. I could not. It was just so clearly messed up to me that I could not step into that realm, even though I've had offers to teach and that was a very easy route to go into. I just couldn't do it. And I know so many people who were kind of in that same line as me who became teachers and quit because of this exact point of seeing how our entire education system is not structured effectively to support each individual child. And the thing is, if you put your kid in school, you don't know if they're going to be supported effectively or not, because you're not there. And I'll just be honest with you. I know this is tough. I know it's really painful to hear, but it's like you're not really getting to really find out what your child is learning. You're not seeing what they're seeing. Like, I have heard some horror stories, and this is not to create a point of fear. That's not my intention. But I have heard stories, and it's obviously clear to me, like common sense, of young kids in elementary school getting access to porn, getting access to all of these other things, because you don't know what's happening in the home of the other kids that are in school, and the parents are not really interacting with each other. And so kids are seeing porn in school, at home, and then coming back to school and figuring out ways to come and share and talk about that in school. And that's where the exposure, for example, lots of other things, but the exposure to pornography is happening much, much younger than it did when we were in school. So, and isn't that obvious? Like, we have the internet so readily available, and you think about all the people watching pornography on their phones, and you think that's not happening in the homes of the kids of your kids, the peers of your kids. And again, it's not to create fear. It's just like, that's the reality of the world that we're currently living in. And my perspective, I'm not saying that we should be prude, but I don't see how the exposure to pornography, and especially like the stuff that you know what's on the internet, what's out there. I don't think exposure to that from another child with your child is an acceptable thing to happen to kids in elementary school. Like, it's just not, it's not cool. It's not cool in any ways. There's no way anybody can convince me otherwise. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And you don't know what's happening in the classroom. That's just one example. But when now a lot of people will then argue for this point, which is, okay, but but homeschooling, it's like there's so much involved. You have to pick a curriculum. You have to be really dedicated and committed to the whole thing, or else you're going to get in trouble with these regulators that are going to come forward, or I'll get in trouble with my state. Some states in the U.S. have regulations about homeschooling. A lot of parents don't want to look at the homeschooling point because it's like, it's too much. It's too overwhelming. It's just too much to handle. They can't even process how they would even do it. But there's a door opening for some consideration there, because a lot of parents all parents have their kids home right now, unless you've got your kid in daycare, as I know a lot of daycares are still open. But the opportunity to make a shift in this perspective of it's too much, it's a burden, I can't handle it. There's too much pressure on the parent to be able to live up to these standards, right, that your state or potentially the US government is going to have. And what if I make a mistake? What if I get in trouble? Like, all those points are going on within a lot of these parents who are not just like in the mindset of, oh, I really just hate having my kids home. I just want them to go back to school. Like, there's a lot of parents who are open to this point, but don't really see how they could do it. And then again, unschooling comes in, which is like, oh, this is a very easy solution to this. But the problem with unschooling is that, again, they're going to get hit by regulators even harder because you don't have a lot of documentation. It's just a more open approach to educating your kid and working with where they're at. And the problem within that is that you're not systematizing your child's education in any sense, which could leave some kids to, for example, not learn how to read until they're 7 or 8 or 9, and not even be introduced to mathematics until that age, because you're making it dependent upon the child's interest to dive into that. Now, I think homeschooling is great. I think unschooling, there's lots of aspects to it that I really, really like. But I want to share some perspective here of some common sense to bridge the gap here, so that we can actually rescue, in a certain sense, the homeschooling and unschooling movements. Because right now they're on a crash course to be totally destroyed by our government regulation. Because it's like they're being separated from from each other. And we're not really taking what are the child's needs here into consideration in a way that makes it so that the people have the power to say no when our government starts actually putting these things in place, or when they start trying to. Because right now we're saying a lot of like, okay, I'll take the regulation, I'll take the control, I don't mind, like if it secures me, if I'm safer, if my child is safer, I'll accept these little things of control. And so the only way that you can stand up and say no really effectively is if you have common sense and you actually have something in place to prove that what the control mechanism is coming in to do is not best for you or your children. So the key to being able to say no to this regulation that's preemptively going to totally ban unschooling, because you won't be able to do just your open and easy route, which in a lot of ways is the most common sense approach to educating kids. You're not going to be able to do that at all. And then having such a strict regulation on homeschooling, making it so that you have to teach certain subjects. They actually want to implement it so that you must teach certain subjects, and you can imagine what those subjects are, but they might not fit in line with your homeschool curriculum that you're doing currently. So you'll have to look at within yourself, okay, am I willing to teach these things or not? Like, all of this should be considered. The only way you can say no to this is to make sure your child is so smart and so properly educated that they beat any standards of measure in place for your child that age, that the state, that the government can even fathom, right? That is the key. Because if we had enough people in our country who are homeschooling and unschooling to actually stand up and make sure that whatever approach you take, your child is really smart, and they know they beat any standards, like I'm saying, like they just go beyond any standard that is currently in place when it comes to reading research, when it comes to education research. If you are able to do that, if we're able to do that as a collective, do you think that any government can actually look and see that and be like, oh wow, we've got 2 million parents whose kids are super smart? There's no way you can squash that. And in fact, how many people who are currently public schooling their kids or private schooling their kids who will look at us with our genius children and be like, okay, maybe I should do that for my kids. Because again, the value system in America is very high of like the individual has rights. Even among our most impoverished population, even among our population with who are really getting access to the worst education, they still have this value system. It's still deeply ingrained in the American culture. And we're slowly eroding away at it. And it's like, okay, how do you think we actually maintain this value system? It's by making sure that our children are properly educated and that they understand the value of this. And they don't accept as normal that they should just be controlled and their rights should be belittled and their rights should be taken away. And that they can't fully consider what's also best for the group either. Like, it should be a common sense approach of what's best for the group. Okay, are we considering that that's also best for the individual? All right, let's look at them both together, right? And I can tell you right now, the research on homeschooling families is that the kids read much more effectively. The kids are much more effective on standardized testing. They're just much more effective in general, and the whole concept of like socialization and all these points are used as trigger words to try to impulse the average person to be like, no, you guys should be regulated. You should be regulated, just like my public and private school child is regulated. So how do we do this? How do we make sure our children are so effective that if anyone were to look at this, they would be like, okay, this is shocking. Like, okay, there's no way we could argue that these children need to now be forced into public school, or these children need to now follow our regulations because look at how extremely well they're doing. Look how extremely smart they are. They totally blow away any standards that we have. How do we do that? Okay, I know how to do this. I know how to do this. We know how to do this at TechnoTutor. Look at my son. My son is 3.5, and he's already reading so amazingly that it blows my mind. Even though I know all of the research, even though I've read all the research, even though I understand how the mind operates, how the brain works, how children learn effectively, it blows my mind at how incredibly able a young child can be so early. My kid, today he learned the words velocity. He learned the word beat, tone. He knows the word oscillation. He's studied electricity. Like, I know that you might not believe me, okay? Which is why my husband and I have made the decision, which was a difficult decision in a lot of ways, to share our family, to share what we're doing with our kids, to put it on video so you can see my son talking the way that he does in complete articulate sentences that would just, it blows away the average adult who meets him. And you meet other kids his age and you can see the result of our education system, of our public education and our private education system. And this is not about comparison. It's not about judgment. It's just we've worked so specifically with my son and now my daughter as well, who's 1.5, who already has mastered all of her uppercase and lowercase letters. She is already moving on to numbers. And I know you might not see the value of that, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people didn't see that with my son when I demonstrated the exact same thing when he was 18 months old. He had all of his upper and lowercase letters mastered, and all of his numbers from 0 to 20 mastered very soon after. But look at where he's at now. If you go and watch the videos of my son and you see him talking and you see how he sits at the piano and focuses for 30 minutes on learning chord theory and learning how to work his synthesizers and his digital piano, he's a genius. Like, it's so clear to me he's a genius. And my daughter is on the exact same path. because we've done the exact same steps with her that we did with my son. And it's as easy as, and I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say easy, because it's so simple for someone to say that I'm promoting something that I'm saying is easy when it's really not easy. But let me just clarify easy. I'll replace that with, it took me 10 minutes a day with each of my children to get them to where they're at today. So I highly recommend go watch the videos that my husband has on his YouTube channel, Cameron V. Cope. Go see for yourself, because we're sharing it all out there. We're putting it all out there. The fact that my son can read at a second grade level, the fact that my daughter's already on that path, the fact that my husband and I have together we've each had 12 years of experience working in education. We have walked into the homes of families who are very, very poor and families that are very rich here in Texas. And we've seen the disparity, but we've also seen the difference, for example, with homeschool children and kids who are in school. We've seen the results of unschooling. We've seen all of the different approaches, and we've taken all of that into account and applied it with our own children, and they annihilate the standards for their age group. And I actually still have people tell me it's just because they're born smart, or must just be their DNA. See, this is the great lie that we're all taught, is that it's just your genetics, it's just your DNA, that some kids get to be smart and some kids don't. And that's what gets us all accepting school also, is because we're just like, well, we don't know what our kid is. We don't know if we can support them effectively. Let's just put them in the system, and the system will support them as best as possible to become their full potential. But that's not what the system is designed to do. If you're watching this video and you're interested, everyone should do this. This should be required reading in America for all American students, but it's not. Go read John Taylor Gatto's Underground History of American Education. Let me see. Hold on. Underground History of American Education. Go and read that for yourself. All of John Taylor Gatto's books are great. His videos are great. He has so much information. But that book is incredible, because you get to really see what's the purpose of our education system. What's the design of it? It wasn't designed to make sure that your individual child is properly cared for to reach their full potential. That's not the design. The design of our entire education system is a filtering system to take the kids out who are are considered low IQ, right? And to put them in jobs where, for example, we need people working, well, maybe not at this very moment, but 6 months ago, we needed people working in fast food. We needed people working at Walmart. We needed people working at Target. And you're not going to get a child who does really, really well at school and gets through that filtering system. They're not going to be the ones working at Target. They're not going to be the ones working at Walmart. They're going to be the ones working in the NSA. They're going to be the ones going to Harvard and becoming one of these speakers at this Harvard summit. So our entire system is designed as a filtering system for our kids. And that's why a lot of parents are smart and recognize this and see this and don't want to put their kids through that filtering system. And they want to sit with their children and they want to cater to what they need. Because again, a lot of parents still have this value within them, the American core value of the importance of the individual. It hasn't been completely destroyed, or you've had so many things happen to you in your life where you become aware of how important it is. And you want to give that to your children. You want your children to understand their value as an individual and what they can bring to the world. You want them to think that they can do better. You want them to believe and to see that they can do more. So that's why you don't put them in this system. But the system is coming now. If you look at it, the system is coming into our homes. Like, that's the attempt that's happening right now. The attempt is to reach into the homeschooling homes and implement the system in there. Instead of all of us questioning the system. And this is something we need to do now. We need to really question the system. And I implore you to investigate what we're doing with TechnoTutor, to find out, why is my son reading the way that he does? Maybe there's something that my husband and I know that you're not aware of. Maybe the years and years and years that we've spent reading all this research and investigating all of this and coming up with a method where kids can learn so quickly and so easily, where they can start investigating all the different things in their world, and it becomes so straightforward, where you don't have to have such a strict curriculum, if you don't want to, in your home, and your child can still excel beyond anything that any measure, anything that most of the educators can even fathom. No research out there can explain can assume or can understand that my son can read the way he can at 3.5. And where is he going to be when he's 5? Where is he going to be when he's 10? Can you imagine what he's going to be capable of? And again, my intention here is not to brag. That's not my intention. I want your children to have the exact same abilities that my children have. That's why I'm not keeping it a secret. That's why we created TechnoTutor. That's why I'm making this video. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a paid actor, I am just a mom. I am a mom. I'm an educator. I've seen the flaws in our system. I've seen children just totally, their abilities and their potential totally squandered, to where they're just left as an adult, just wishing they could have been able to focus on the things that they would have enjoyed, wishing they had more skills, wishing they had more ability to learn, wishing they could adapt more quickly to our world. We've got a lot of people who are out of work right now. We have a lot of people who are even in middle class kind of cushy jobs who are like, crap, like I don't know if I have job security. And it's like, imagine if you could take that adult who's super stressed, and this may even be you watching this, take the adult who's super stressed by the hand, take them back into their childhood and give them the ability to be so effective at learning that they never, ever, ever doubt themselves. Never. And this is what my children are being raised with. And I have the balls to say this because I'm not afraid of what anyone thinks. Like, we have the proof at this point, where it's like in the past, I've the current state of like authority in our education system squashes anyone who challenges it. They squashed John Taylor Gatto, where his movement was actually very small. They've squashed a lot of really great teachers. Like, we have a neighbor who has worked in the education system for a really long time. And we were talking, I think it was yesterday, and she was just telling us all the state of our current school system here in Texas, and just sharing a lot of that. And it's like, I've heard that story. You can't even imagine how many times I've heard this story from teachers, where it's just like, they know what's going on, but it's very difficult to challenge the authority of our education system. And what I'm telling you is, we have this opportunity with all of these homeschooling parents and unschooling parents to come together and, still maintain whatever your path is that you're doing, but add this part in where you're making sure that you're really working with how your child actually learns, like their real natural learning ability, so that they won't even be able to be tested effectively. They're just going to blow away every test that's put forth, any of these regulations. So it'll effectively be us as a community, as this group, this American movement of a real American values, saying, no, we don't accept these regulations, because my child is just so beyond everything that you have even designed for them to do. So yeah, I could talk for a long time on this, but I'll end it here because I know I've been talking for a while. But go and investigate, find out more about what we're doing with TechnoTutor. Go in and see my children, go watch them on my YouTube, or my husband's YouTube channel, Cameron V. Cope, and go and see what we're doing. It's crucial. Like, don't waste any more time. Don't waste any more time trying to figure out how you're going to educate your kids. Go and look at what we're doing, consider what we're doing, and ask us more questions, find out more, because that's your responsibility as a parent, and it's your responsibility as an American as well, because you have a responsibility to instill this value system within your kids. You can add whatever your perspective is, otherwise you can add that as well, but this basic value system of the importance of the individual needs to be maintained by the parent to the child, because the school's not giving it to them. So let's do that for our children. And this is the way forward, because it's not going to happen from protests. That's what happened in Sweden. People protested, people, wrote letters, angry letters. They did all these things, and it's just over. Homeschooling is done there. So it's not done here yet. And we can't just get sucked in to these regulations and these controls because we want a little bit of security, or have other people decide for us what our children are going to be doing. We need to make that decision now. Now is the time. Before all this stuff gets put in place, we need to do it now. So anyways, if you have further questions for me, you can connect with me here on Facebook. Check out that YouTube channel, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.